Hi everyone, this is Christina. Chris Cox is streaming cool 3D stuff. The link to his Twitch channel is in the description below. He was doing an awesome bowling alley in Blender, which he wants to use in DAZ Studio. He did some tests in DAZ and had to set up lots and lots of textures. He said he would like to know how to merge all the textures that are exported from Substance Painter, so he has less to set up in DAZ Studio. I mentioned he could do that in Blender with the free add-on TexTools before he exports the model to Substance. Not only am I really bad at explaining only with words in the chat, I also missed some stuff, so it didn't work out. I promised Chris to make a video about that topic, and here we are. As an example, I will use those headphones I modeled a few years ago. It has several separate objects, and I have set up placeholder materials. Those are 5 materials in total at the moment. This is just an example. You can follow along with any object you have modeled or maybe downloaded from any marketplace. Just make sure all UV editing is done. Seams, unwrapping and the UV layout must be finished. Double check that before you start. If you don't know how to do that, maybe wait till the video where I will explain UV editing including texel density and UV layouts is published in about 3 weeks, maybe earlier. Chris is a pro, and he already knows that UV stuff. I just wanted to show him how to get only one texture set in Substance Painter, therefore I did this video first, and the other one will follow. We will be using the free add-on TexTools. You can download it from GitHub, the link is in the description below. You just grab the zip file and install it by going to the Blender Preferences, Add-ons. Install and activate the add-on, restart Blender and you are good to go. Or kind of, because there is stuff you should avoid in the TexTools, including the section Color ID. But color IDs, also called material IDs or ID maps, are exactly what gives us the option in Substance Painter to still separate all those parts, although we only have one texture set. So, we need the ID map. But let's first talk about what we have to merge. I have seen videos where people merged all their objects, and you don't have to do that. Substance Painter doesn't care about the objects at all, it cares about UV maps and materials. So, you can have hundreds of separated objects in your scene, and they can still have one single texture set if the objects have the same UV tile, and you export without materials or merge them to one single material. Which means, we have to merge the UVs on one UV tile, do our color ID map and bake it, and in some cases we also have to merge the material zones after we have baked the ID map. For the ID map we need uniform colors in each material zone, so we will replace the real materials with colors. Now, about that dangerous stuff in the TexTools. First, never ever go to the TexTools with your original file. Save your file under another file name, so everything is backed up. I cannot stress that enough. After I saved a backup, I go to the UV editing and call the N panel. Here we find the TexTools. I will not talk about texel density or why I laid out the UVs the way they are. We will come to that in the next video. But to show you that, what you see here is only half of the headphones. I took the existing model, deleted one half of it, and used mirror modifiers on all the objects. If I would have done it with the original model, so without the mirrors, the UV islands would have to be much smaller, because I would have to fit double the stuff in the UV tile. And if we look at this dotted texture, you can see it already seems to be too large, because we don't have enough texture resolution, and it is the same with the leather. But this is all I could get, because I fitted all those materials in that one UV tile. Let me bring back the overlays. This for example is the leather. This is the fabric. Then we have this one here, this is the dotted rubber material, and here is the same texture on the inside of the bracket. Well, half of it, because it is mirrored too. And in a case like this, you have to make sure that the seam really fits well. Therefore, I had to scale the island down a little bit so I don't get a visible seam in here. So, this is how the UV layout looks like when everything is fitted into that one UV tile. Now, let's talk about what to avoid. Here is the section for the color ID. Dangerous stuff that can really mess up your material zones completely. So, don't go there at all, keep it closed and stay away from it. You might now think, are you kidding me? You tell me I should use the TexTools for the ID map, but how do I do that without the section that is meant for that? Well, that is easy. I decided to provide the file I use myself for this stuff. You can download it for free, the link is in the description below. After you have downloaded it, you go to the File menu, click on Append, and go into the folder where you save the download. Click it, then open the Materials folder and grab those 20 materials. If you want to set up something like this yourself, you must use Node Materials, otherwise it does not work. You can also append those materials to your default startup file, then maybe tick this option Fake User, so all the colors stay in the file, even if they are not in use by any object. In this case I just click Append, and when you go to the material list you can see them here. The 0 tells you that is not in use, and when you apply the materials that is a useful hint. You see if you already used a material, so you don't accidentally apply the same color twice. That is not the case when you use the fake users, so my personal preference is to not use them. Now I save the file again and go through all objects and their materials zones. For each material slot I replace the material with a different color, and I only care about enough contrast between the colors in the 3D view. We rarely use the color IDs in the 2D view, so I don't care about that. Let's go to the next part, where we have 2 material slots, so I have to do 2 different colors for that. And even if it is the same material on different objects, they all get their own color. If you don't like a color, you can just change it here. Make it darker, or choose a different one, whatever you want. Now all the parts should have their own color, and I double check that I didn't use a color twice. I go back to the UV editing. But first I have to select all objects, that is important. I bring back the overlays, so I see what I am doing. You don't have to select any UVs, but it is important that you select all parts with the materials which you want to merge on one texture set. So, in this case all parts have to be selected, because we only want one single texture set in Substance Painter. Now, for the bake. Let's start at the top. I usually bake with 2K, but for the sake of time, I will use 1K now. That should be fine with this small object, and in general, Painter doesn't care much about the resolution of the ID map. You might get artifacts later in Painter if you use a very low resolution, but we will keep the file. So you can come back later to bake with a higher resolution, if needed. Here under baking, you see the label says, Bake 8. We don't want that, so I go down here and activate the option Single Texture. That is really important. By the way, if I click one of those here, I get an error message, but it still works. And we don't care which name the add-on sets for the texture, we will save the image under the name we want anyway. Now it says, Bake 1. If you don't use my color file and use your own materials, make sure you use Node Materials, otherwise you will get a warning here. This option you only get when you go to the add-on preferences. You have to change the bake background from default to custom. You can set up a default color here, and I like to bake on a transparent or dark background. You can still change the color for every bake in the end panel. For the baking mode, we don't need the tangent normals, we need a color map. If I click the icon, all those others are shown, and you might think, there is a material ID, I will go with that. No, don't do that. That baking mode does not respect the colors we set up, it uses its own and overwrites our colors, and it only uses a few. I believe those are 8, but I'm not sure. But if you have more material zones, the material ID baker runs out of colors, and it starts to repeat them. So, you might end up with two red zones, which don't belong to each other. That's not what we want at all. We want a separate, not yet used color for every part and each of its texture slots so Painter can work properly with those colors. Therefore, I don't use the material ID, instead I go with the base color or the diffuse. We don't have to generate a texture to bake on, the add-on will do that automatically. Just set the texture size and the padding. Here for 1K, I go with a padding of 3. Click bake and just wait till the bake is done. While Blender is working, let's talk about that mirrored stuff. I usually don't work that way, not in personal projects, and let alone when it comes to client work, where mirrored UVs are a no-go. Even if the mesh itself is symmetrical, most often when it comes to the finished texturing, I don't want symmetry anyway. In contrary, I break such symmetry on purpose to give the object a more unique and realistic look. So, I usually apply the mirror modifiers after I am done with modeling and setting the UV seams, and do the UVs for the whole object. If you do personal projects, you can go with mirrored UVs. Just be aware there are drawbacks when you work like that, and we will have a look at that in Substance Painter. Blender has finished the baking, and here is our Bake Color ID map. I hide the overlays so you can see it better. We have to save that image, so Image. Save as. I don't save it under the file name the add-on suggests, there is no need for that. You can name the image however you want. You might think, wait, doesn't it have to have a specific naming convention, so Painter can import the ID map directly when we set up the project? Yes, that option exists, but I don't want to have to remember that naming convention all the time. I just import the ID map afterwards, no problem at all. I can name it however I want, it doesn't matter. So, the first major step is done. And if you are using Blender 3.1 or a newer version, and export to OBJ, you are now done completely. You just have to export your mesh as an OBJ without materials, and can skip the next step by going to the export chapter. If the export without materials doesn't work for you because you are on an older Blender version, or you are exporting with another file format where the export options are different and you can't find the correct option, you have to do an additional step by merging the materials. And that will mess up the original material zones, so we need to keep a copy of the current state. Therefore, I save the file and then save it under a new name. If something goes wrong and I have to bake the color ID in a higher resolution, I can go back to this state. This option here, I got that wrong in Chris's stream. This is to preview the already baked ID map on the object. Clicking it will delete all materials on our object. So again, a dangerous setting, but in this case, it is to our advantage because we don't have to go through the objects manually to set up that single material we need. This option does that automatically for us. We maybe see nothing in the preview because the add-on wants to use the image with the file name it suggested, and I didn't save that. But all I need are clean material slots, so that is fine. With all the parts selected, I just choose one of the materials and then press Ctrl-L to copy the material to all other parts. All parts now have that same single material. To be honest, although in Blender 3.1 it works without merging the materials, I will keep merging them because we cannot save export presets anymore. At least I couldn't find an option to do that. It's time to export our mesh. I make sure that all parts that need to be in the mesh are selected. Then I go to File, Export, and choose Wavefront OBJ. If you are using an older Blender version or another file format for the export dialog will look different. There seems to be no option anymore to save export presets, and I really do not like that. We cannot save that important option inside a preset, so you have to remember it for each and every export. Anyway, I go with the option selected only. Here I keep the UV coordinates and the normals checked, but I uncheck the materials. That is the important part. If you don't merge the materials in that additional step and forget to uncheck the materials option here, you end up with a texture set for every material in Substance. So make sure you uncheck the materials option or do that additional step and merge the materials. The rest down here I keep unchecked, that works fine. The export in 3.1 is super fast, I am very happy about that. I open Painter, and all we will see there after we have imported the mesh will be one single texture set. So, File, New, and I select my mesh. Here I go with 2K. I switch to OpenGL, and I check the option Compute Tangent Space. And here is that section where I could directly import the ID map if it had the correct naming convention. Like I said, I don't care, and will import the ID map later. So, I just click OK. And here we have our object with only one texture set. I go to the Mesh Bake. Here I go with 2K, and I don't have to uncheck the ID. I bake that and just put in my own ID map in a moment. What I don't need is the world space normal. I keep the AO, but curvature, position, and thickness I don't need in this case, and with those three textures left, I bake this. Now I save the file. And import my ID map. Here we have it. That will of course be a texture, and I save it to my project. In the texture set settings I scroll down to the ID section. I just click that and choose my own map. If I now go to the channels and choose the ID, we can see, here are my material colors. Of course, it is useful to know how you set up a layer with a color selection manually. You might need that. So, let's do that, but I will also show you a quicker way. I grab a material and drag that onto our whole object, like this. Then I right-click the layer thumbnail and add a mask with a color selection. With the picker I can select every part that gets that material. Let's delete that example. I will add a fill layer and want to use a plastic, this here. I again drag the material onto my object, but now I press Ctrl. While I am doing that, the material colors are shown. I hover over the part I want and let go. The material is now only on that part, and Painter has set up the layer including the mask with the color selection automatically. I change the color to black. I grab that blue plastic again and Ctrl drag it onto the bracket. Then I go into the mask and with the picker I can now choose all the parts which should have that material. Then there is the dotted rubber. That goes here. Again, I go into the selection mask and choose the second part where I want this material. We have to change the size. The pattern is way too large. That is something we cannot do later in the app where we use the texture. When we export all this as one texture, you can't scale a specific part of it. So, we have to do the scale of the pattern here in Painter. But be aware, on parts with a low texture resolution, Painter can only do so much. I will explain this more in depth in the next video. I go to the scaling. Let's try 4. The size looks okay. I pull the height range up a bit, that should do. Then we have the fabric. I grab this one here and change the color to the dark tone. For the scale I will also try 4. Maybe that is a bit too much. Let's try 3 or 3.5. Yes, I like that better. With this setup, I just pick this part here. What's not done yet is the leather. I grab that artificial one. I guess I can keep the scale on this one like it is. And that's it for our base materials. Now, let's have a look at those mirrored UVs. Maybe I want to stamp a logo on here. I grab the brush and change the color to the dark one. Then I go to the alphas. Let's use this one. I make the brush larger and click once to stamp this on. If I now have a look at the other side, you see it is mirrored. With this alpha, it doesn't really matter, because it is symmetrical. But now I grab a text alpha and stamp that on the bracket. The text is mirrored, and the quality is very bad, because we have a low resolution on that UV island. You can work around that with separate parts for the logos, like you see here in Blender. But those should have a good texture resolution, therefore it makes no sense to pack those parts on the same texture set we use at the moment. They should get their own. So, keep that in mind when you do your projects. If you have questions, please ask in the comments. We will use those headphones in the next video, where we will talk about textile density and how you can set up the UV layout for an object with parts that should have a specific TD. Yes, finally more about textile density. When I watched the TD video, I realized not only has the second part been missing for a long time, I also promised we will model a beach set with a chair and an umbrella, and we will get to that. But that will be a whole series with at least 5 videos, and this time I will first finish all parts so I can upload them all at once, and you don't have to wait for the other parts. So, meanwhile we will dive deeper into textile density in the next video with those headphones, and see more about the topic with the beach set in a few weeks. Thank you very much for watching. If you like my content or just find this video useful, please like, share and subscribe. If you already did, thank you very much. Hopefully see you in the next video. Till then, stay safe wherever you are, and take care. Happy blendering. Bye bye.